The temple is almost the heart of the life of the village. The village centers itself, builds itself on the temple, and has its fiestas and its celebrations. They save their money, and when they have enough money, they decide to have a celebration. They also save their money to bury their parents or relatives, because the cost of the burial is quite high, and sometimes several families get together and pool their resources to bury their relatives. Meanwhile, the relatives are kept in a cool place until the time of the ceremony. Sometimes the ceremony is extremely luxurious and devoted entirely to some high personage, and one can tell the status of the personage by the layers of the tower. The tower is built like a pagoda, layer upon layer, getting thinner and thinner as it reaches the top. It is decorated with gold paper, with lace, with textiles, with carved ivory, with mirrors. It is really far more beautiful than any Christmas tree ever invented. And if it is very tall, it means that it's an important personage, and there will be 2 or 3 bands of music instead of just one, and that there will be more people attending. But when there are several burials of relatives who have a modest income, who have put their money together to have a celebration, then there is only 1 band of music, and the whole thing is much more simple. While many people are working on the decoration of the tower, the women keep bringing their offerings, shaped in different ways, sometimes scarves, sometimes flower cuts out of palm leaves, mirrors, gold sheets and silver sheets, which they treat the way the Japanese treat the colored paper, make shapes like birds and swans, and all this is attached to the tower until it's decorated to the very, very top. And at the very, very top of it, they tie a bird by one leg, and later on this bird plays a symbolic role. That is, when they begin to burn the body, the bird is freed. Meanwhile, the musicians play, and the family is standing guard around the body. And at a certain moment and a certain signal, the body is brought out and carried up a ladder and placed in the part of the tower that is made ready for it. And then the ladders are taken off, and the tower is placed by long pieces of wood on the shoulders of the villagers. There are many of them. I think there may have been as many as 20. Carrying it is quite heavy and quite tall, and they have difficulties sometimes with the tower catching on to the trees. Once the body was on the tower, and the men began their march, once or twice they did a curious thing. They made a complete turn, absolute complete turn, which was not too easy, because you would catch again on the branches of the trees. But this was intended to confuse the evil spirits. Now the women who came out with the ornaments were different from the relatives. The relatives came out and they unrolled a bolt of white material and held it over their heads. And it was about 20 yards long, each woman holding up the white material so that it made a cover from the sun, and then they walked under it. And children were about, and photographers, and tourists, always in their bad taste, too undressed, immodest, crudely dressed. And I was ashamed of them. A terribly fat woman with a terribly short dress, and all the things that could possibly offend a ceremonial thing. They have no feeling at all of respect for the celebration and the feeling of the people towards that fiesta, and how they want that fiesta to be beautiful. The girls carry everything on their heads, mattresses and bedstands, and once I saw a girl carrying a small shark. They carry melons, bananas, and then for the burial ceremony, these ornamental baskets, which are meant to be offerings to the dead, are almost impossible to describe. They are so beautiful. They are a combination of flowers and fruit and ribbons and cut out some palm leaves and paper also cut out like lace. And then they are in the form of a pyramid. And the pyramid is so colorful and so beautifully arranged that it's a work of art. And at one time, when it was a particularly religious feast, and about 30 or 40 baskets were brought by the women, carried on their heads, and exhibited. And each one was lovelier than the other. They showed great originality in decorating them, especially in the sense of color, and always with a touch of gold. There's always gold. Finally, the last temple we saw was the most dramatic of all, because it had been built on top of a rock which was about 10 yards away from the shore, 10 or 20 yards, I'm not very good at distance. And on top of this rock, the temple was built, and it was mainly occupied by monkeys. The waves tossed against the rocks, and then the people who wanted to come and bring presents to the temple had to walk across this ocean. First they had to wait for low tide, and even in low tide they had to hang on to a rope. And all this carrying a basket of offering on their heads. They held on to the string, and the waves would come sometimes up to their waist. But they made the passage, and they climbed the rock. They went up to the temple, and they laid their offering. Offering food and fruits and flowers and ornamentations and scarves to the gods was one of their principal occupations. Their life was extremely simple. They didn't cook for the food. They just cooked rice and had a little bit of fish with the rice and ate fruit. But this very sober meal did them for lunch and for dinner. But for the gods, then everything, melons and all the beautiful fruit that could be found. And this astonished me quite a lot, because when they were so poor really in their own belongings, that you wondered how a cruel god could accept offerings of the best food. But then I found out that the Balinese are both mystical and very practical. They bring the offering, they stay and pray, they leave the offering for about an hour or two, they visit the temple, and then they take the food back home and eat it. I thought that was very charming.